When Daniel Carter was called into the bank manager's office on a rainy Tuesday morning, he thought it was about the overtime request he'd submitted the week before. Instead, he was accused of violating company policy over a missing $9. $9. Less than the cost of lunch. Less than the gas it took him to drive to work. By noon, the single father of an 8-year-old daughter was carrying a cardboard box filled with family photos, a coffee mug that read "World's Best Dad," and the name badge he'd worn proudly for 7 years. Across the lobby, customers quietly watched him leave. No one imagined that 3 weeks later, the same man would walk back through those front doors, not as an employee, but as the representative of an organization responsible for moving over $86 million. And before the day was over, the manager who had humiliated him would discover that kindness, or the lack of it, has a way of changing lives in the most unexpected ways. Daniel Carter lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Ever since his wife, Emily, passed away after a sudden illness 4 years earlier, Daniel had dedicated every part of his life to being the best father he could be. Every morning started before sunrise. He packed Lily's lunch, helped her with her homework over breakfast, walked her to the school bus, and then headed to Riverside Community Bank, where he had worked for 7 years. Money was never abundant, but Daniel had learned how to make every paycheck count. He drove an old pickup truck, repaired things instead of replacing them, and skipped buying anything for himself if it meant Lily could take piano lessons or join a school field trip. Despite the pressure, he rarely complained. His co-workers often wondered how someone carrying so much responsibility could remain so patient. Daniel had become one of the most trusted employees in the branch. Elderly customers often waited in longer lines just to work with him because he never rushed them. He patiently explained confusing paperwork, helped people recover forgotten passwords, and even carried groceries to customers' cars after work. To him, kindness wasn't something reserved for special occasions. It was simply the way people deserved to be treated. One Friday afternoon, the branch was unusually busy. Several employees had called in sick, leaving the remaining staff scrambling to help a constant stream of customers. Near closing time, an elderly gentleman completed a withdrawal and unknowingly left $9 in cash on Daniel's counter. Daniel noticed it immediately. "Sir," he called as the customer walked toward the exit. But the man had already climbed into his car and driven away. Following procedure, Daniel documented the unclaimed money and placed it inside a labeled envelope, intending to return it when the customer came back. Before he could finish the paperwork, another employee accidentally gathered several envelopes from nearby workstations while cleaning up for the night. Daniel didn't realize the envelope had been moved until Monday morning. The cash wasn't missing. It had simply been placed in the wrong audit tray. Within minutes, the accounting department located the envelope. Every dollar was accounted for. The customer's account remained accurate. The bank lost nothing. Daniel assumed the matter was over. He was wrong. Later that morning, branch manager Melissa Grant called him into her office. Melissa had built her reputation on strict discipline. She believed every policy should be enforced exactly as written, regardless of circumstances. Awards recognizing her leadership lined the wall behind her desk, but few employees felt comfortable approaching her with problems. She placed a thin folder on the desk. "I've completed my review of Friday's incident." Daniel calmly explained what had happened, emphasizing that the money had never been lost and had been fully documented. "It was located exactly where the audit team found it," he said. "No customer was affected." Melissa folded her hands. "You failed to immediately secure the cash according to company policy." "I understand that," Daniel replied. "It was an honest mistake. I've never received a disciplinary warning. I'll gladly complete additional training." Melissa shook her head. "The decision has already been made." Daniel stared at her. "I'm being terminated?" "Effective immediately." For a moment, he couldn't find the words. 7 years of loyal service. Thousands of satisfied customers. One honest mistake involving $9. Gone. Daniel slowly unclipped his employee badge and placed it on the desk. I only have one request, he said quietly. Melissa looked up. I'd like to tell my daughter before someone else does. She gave a brief nod. You may collect your belongings. As Daniel packed family photographs, a coffee mug Lily had painted for Father's Day, and a small potted plant from his desk, the lobby grew unusually quiet. Several co-workers looked away, struggling to hide their disappointment. One teller slipped $20 into his lunch bag while he wasn't looking. Daniel noticed before leaving. He gently returned it. You keep it, he whispered. Someone else might need it someday. Outside, rain covered the windshield as he sat in his truck without starting the engine. His biggest worry wasn't paying bills or finding another job. It was figuring out how to explain everything to Lily without frightening her. That evening, Lily immediately noticed something was different. Dad? He looked up from the kitchen table. Yeah, sweetheart? You look sad. Daniel forced a small smile. I lost my job today. She walked over and hugged him without saying anything for several seconds. Finally she looked up. Does that mean we're going to be okay? He wrapped his arms around her. We're going to be more than okay. Promise? I promise. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel accepted every honest job he could find. He delivered furniture, repaired fences, drove packages across town, and helped neighbors with yard work. The income wasn't steady, but it was enough to keep food on the table while he searched for permanent work. One afternoon his phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as attorney Rebecca Morrison. Mr. Carter, I'm trying to locate the former employee from Riverside Community Bank who helped a client named Arthur Bennett several years ago. Daniel searched his memory. I've helped a lot of customers. You stayed after closing for nearly an hour to help him recover access to his accounts after an identity theft issue. Daniel smiled. I remember Mr. Bennett. He was worried he'd lost everything. Rebecca paused. He never forgot your kindness. She explained that Arthur Bennett, a retired entrepreneur and longtime investor, had recently passed away. Before his death, he had instructed his legal team to find the banker who treated me like family when everyone else treated me like another appointment. Daniel sat silently. Rebecca continued. Mr. Bennett established a charitable foundation. He wanted someone with integrity, not just financial experience, to oversee its operations. A few days later Daniel met Rebecca in a downtown law office. He expected to discuss volunteer work. Instead, she placed several folders on the conference table. Arthur Bennett's charitable foundation managed more than $86 million in investments dedicated to scholarships, affordable housing projects, veterans assistance, community libraries, and youth education. Daniel wasn't inheriting Arthur's wealth. He was being asked to become the executive director responsible for protecting and distributing those charitable resources according to Arthur's wishes. Daniel stared at the paperwork. There are people far more qualified than me. Rebecca smiled. There are certainly people with longer resumes. She slid a handwritten note across the table. Arthur had written it months before his passing. It read, "The man who gives an elderly stranger an hour of his time when no one is watching is the same man I trust when millions of dollars are involved. Skills can be taught. Character cannot." Daniel quietly wiped tears from his eyes. Not because of the money. Because someone had remembered a simple act of kindness that he had never considered extraordinary. Several weeks later, the Bennett Foundation prepared to consolidate its financial accounts under a single banking partner. Because of the size of the portfolio, several regional banks requested meetings, including Riverside Community Bank. Melissa Grant personally prepared the presentation. She expected experienced corporate executives. Instead, Daniel walked through the front entrance wearing a simple navy blue suit. The lobby became silent. Former co-workers recognized him immediately. Smiles spread across several faces. Melissa stepped forward. For a brief moment, she couldn't speak. Daniel smiled politely. "It's good to see everyone again." The presentation began. Melissa described investment services, charitable account management, and long-term financial planning. Daniel listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and complimenting several community outreach programs the bank had introduced. He remained respectful throughout the meeting. When Melissa finished, Rebecca thanked her for the presentation. Daniel leaned forward. "I have one question." Melissa nodded. "If an employee with years of excellent service makes one honest mistake that harms no customer and costs the bank nothing, should that person be coached, or publicly humiliated?" The room became completely still. Melissa lowered her eyes. For the first time in years, she remembered the expression on Daniel's face as he carried his cardboard box through the lobby. She remembered how quickly she had dismissed 7 years of loyalty. After several long seconds, she quietly answered, "I should have handled it differently." Daniel nodded. "I appreciate your honesty." He stood and extended his hand. "Our foundation has decided to work with another financial institution." Melissa accepted the handshake. Daniel's decision wasn't motivated by revenge. Trust had simply become more important than convenience. Months later, Riverside's corporate headquarters completed an internal leadership review. During confidential interviews, numerous employees described a workplace built on fear rather than encouragement. High turnover, declining morale, and repeated complaints about inflexible management painted a much larger picture than a single termination. Melissa wasn't removed because of one decision involving Daniel. She lost her management position because years of similar choices revealed a pattern of leadership that ignored the company's own values of respect, fairness, and employee development. The bank responded by introducing leadership training focused on coaching, empathy, and conflict resolution. Sometimes accountability creates change that anger never could. Several months passed before Daniel received an unexpected letter. It was from Melissa. She apologized sincerely. There were no excuses. No attempts to shift blame. She admitted she had confused enforcing rules with leading people. She explained that after leaving the bank, she began volunteering at a nonprofit that helped unemployed workers prepare for interviews and rebuild their confidence. Daniel read the letter twice before writing back. His response was simple. "Thank you for your honesty. I accept your apology. We all make mistakes. What matters most is what we learn from them." Forgiveness didn't erase the past. But it allowed both of them to move forward. Under Daniel's leadership, the Bennett Foundation expanded its impact across several communities. Scholarships helped hundreds of first-generation college students pursue their dreams. Emergency grants prevented struggling families from losing their homes. Local libraries received funding for children's reading programs, and small businesses gained access to affordable community loans. One evening, Lily looked around their modest kitchen and asked the question every child eventually wonders. "Dad, are we rich now?" Daniel smiled. "We have enough." She frowned thoughtfully. "So, yes?" He laughed. "The foundation has a lot of money. But it doesn't belong to us." "What belongs to us?" He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Our choices." Lily smiled. "I think that's better." Years later, Daniel visited a new neighborhood library funded by the Bennett Foundation. Children laughed as they explored shelves filled with books. Parents read stories together. Volunteers helped students with homework after school. Near the entrance stood a small bronze plaque. It didn't mention $86 million. It didn't mention banks. It didn't mention lost jobs. It simply read, Great communities are built one act of kindness at a time. Daniel stood quietly for a moment. He realized that losing his job had felt like the end of his story. Instead, it had become the beginning of something far greater. If he had never stayed late to help an elderly customer. If he had allowed bitterness to replace compassion. If he had answered unfairness with anger instead of grace. None of it would have happened. The $9 had closed one door. Kindness had opened another beyond anything he could have imagined. Because in the end, the greatest investment we ever make isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we choose to lift, the respect we show when no one is watching, and the kindness that continues long after we're gone.